All right, well, welcome again to the 2025 Legislative Review. We'll be trying to meet weekly for 6 weeks during the legislative session to go through some of the bills. And hopefully there'll be some good information for people here. So I did receive some questions via email. And so we'll try and go through those. And then if you guys have questions on bills you're interested in or want to know about, if there's still time, you can let me know what those are and we can look at them, or you can email me, put it in the meeting chat, and we can go through them next week as well. So definitely prefer to go through things you guys are interested in. But first, Jill, you had some questions on a number of bills. So wanted to make sure that we address those because you had sent those over first. I guess too, let me share my screen here so you can see these. Hey, Jill was looking at a number of them involving changes to the voting process. And so one of those was voting revisions from Representative Rick Ship. This is HB 213, if you want to pull it up on your own computer. I guess just real quick, if you want to pull these up, you can go to le.utah.gov, and then you can hit, once you're there, you can go to bills and say the 2025 bills. It pulls these up for the HB, the House bills, or the SB for the Senate bills. And you can click into those and then go down and click on the one we're looking at. So we're looking at HB 213. So this bill, essentially what this one was doing, I did look at it, and this is a pretty accurate summary. He's proposing that people aren't automatically signed up for vote by mail, and that if you don't vote in an election, you have to re-request the vote by mail ability. Essentially, it sounds like he's trying to make it so that we're not sending ballots to people who are not voting or who did not request to have a mail-in ballot. And so it would make it so mail-in ballots are opt-in and they only continue in effect for so long as you continue to opt in each election, or if you vote, it will continue if you opted in. So curious if any of you have any thoughts or particular questions on this bill, if you think it's a good or bad bill, or anything you want to discuss. Jill, go ahead.
I think it's a really good bill. I have a little bit of concern where they're using a lot of may not, where I think it should be shall not. I mean, there's a lot of lines 604, 686, 733, 771. They're using, that it may happen and not shall happen.
Okay, so those are good concerns to bring up. One of the things to know on these lines right here with the black text, these haven't been changed. These are existing law. And it was interesting. I was talking to someone just recently, and he was noting that more and more they're starting to use the word will instead of shall. And I'm also seeing this more. And I've been curious if one reason they're not using shall, so if they say may not instead of shall not, and they say will instead of shall, I've wondered if it's an attempt to sound less religious, is my guess. But the term may not, when they say may not, this actually shuts down all discretion. The term may, like you point out, it does allow them to have discretion on something if it just says they may do something. But when it says may not, it means they can't choose to do it. So it's the same, may not is essentially the same as shall when they use it. It gets interpreted virtually the same there. It's only if there's not a not after it. Shall and may are very important to consider then. But when it's may not after, it's usually okay. Because they can't choose to do that. Okay.
Yeah, so there is I think my biggest concern about these bills, and I haven't read through a lot of them or anything like that, but is that they sound so good, and the bulk of it is good, and then they throw in something. It's at the end, or they sneak something in there that completely changes it, and it's almost like, I think it was Sophie. Somebody said we have to think of our legislators as used car salesmen, and the bills are the used cars that they're selling. And they are going to paint that to look, this is a great car. This is, runs great. It's perfect. And then you find out it's a lemon. And I think that that's such a great analogy. So when you guys are talking about this bill, it's like, oh, that sounds great. So, because I think the end goal here is that we need to do away with mail-in ballots, right? I mean, we need to just have it, mail out ballots, whatever, mail in ballots. It needs to be in person on election day, unless you request an absentee ballot. But I'm just saying, does this bill is Jill, I don't know if you have read every square inch of this, because there's a fluoride bill out there that sounds so great. And then at the very end, Tracy Halverson looked it over and she said, nope, they're throwing it right back. They're giving it right back to the Department of Health at the end. So anyway, that's
Right,
that's
right.
my
But isn't that to put out the prescriptions? That's not to keep the fluoride in our water.
Yeah,
That
so
would be
to answer these two things, Kay, I went through this bill a little bit quickly at the start. This was one that Jill had emailed to me before. I did look it through, so I didn't go through it line by line here on the call, just trying to save a little time. I did not see any concerns with this bill. Rec Ship has, or I should say, any lemons inserted into it. So you may have concerns. Someone may want, there to be mail-in ballots for everyone, and they would be concerned. But I'm just saying that in this situation, the highlighted provisions at the start were very accurate with what was in the bill. It was one I had looked at. And so if you send me bills beforehand, I will look at them. And then to the fluoride bills point with Jill and Kay, the fluoride bill did ban adding fluoride to water and made it criminal to put in water. But then they have that prescription side where you can still get it via prescription and stuff. And so they did give some authority to the health department with that, but not to put it in water. So some people may like that. They may
okay.
see it
Well,
as a step forward. Some may
what I'll
not.
do is I didn't know if Tracy had a chance to hear about this group, or if she's joined or anything like that, but she's really good at reading bills. And so I'll talk to her about that and get some more specifics on what her concern was about that.
Yeah, and some
Because I
people,
really do feel like some of them they've got a little, they try and make it all, sound really great. And then there's something in there that completely, there's one about freedom of religion. That's another bad bill that they completely threw it on its head, by adding some other language into it. So do we have, who in this group is like really has the time and the legal background and knowledge to be able to read a bill and interpret it and find the faults and things like that? I mean, I can read them for sure. I don't have
yeah,
any
so
legal background.
I guess,
Are we going to have a people do that?
so if it's helpful to understand, I am an attorney. I do a lot of work with the legislature. I do constitutional work and things as well. And so this is meant to be a call with an attorney where you can ask for a legal opinion on things and bills, and get that. And so that is the benefit of the call. We're not just people just going through things. It's meant to be able to say, hey, Austin, can you look at this? Can you let us know about it? And then we go through and talk the legal side of it is the point here. So again, if you have things specifically, it's helpful to send them before so that I can look at them before the call. I certainly can't look through every single possible bill. There's just too many. But for the ones you have concerns about, bring them up, and that works great. We'll keep trying to move along a little bit quick on some of these so that we can get to them.
Well, Austin, which bills do you have concerns about? Throw them out there.
Well, again, sorry, we're gonna keep going in the order that we have here, which is we give respect first to people who submit them on the call. So we're going through those first. And these are ones that Jill had brought up. So we're going to HB 231 now, which is the primary election amendments. And this one, this one's interesting, and it needs to be viewed in conjunction with another bill. And so this one says that for certain primary election races, if no candidate receives more than 50% of the votes in the race, the person who wins the nomination will be determined by conducting a runoff election between the two candidates who receive the most votes in the initial primary election. So if you go down through this one, there were a couple interesting parts where it talks about, let's see, right here, starting on line 307. To conduct a runoff election described in subsection 2, the election officer shall, 35 days after the date of the regular primary election, hold a runoff election. And then it says to conduct the election in accordance with section 20A-3A-202, except that they can't have early voting for the runoff election. And then this was, I think, the part that was interesting. They're going to provide notice for the runoff election by at least 2 days before the day of the election, publishing the notice in the newspaper of general circulation, and at least 2 days before the election, posting one copy of the notice, and at least 5 days before the election, mailing the notice to each registered voter. So they're not giving you a lot of time to have noticed that there's a runoff. And so this is one that may reduce the number of people deciding a runoff election. I was kind of curious why they chose to make the deadline so close. But this bill is being proposed because there's another bill. If we go back here, I think if I remember right, yeah, 193. Or HB 193, and this is one that I do have concerns about, quite a few concerns about. This one, if you come on down, what it's doing is it's reducing the number of signatures necessary to qualify for the primary ballot. And right now, you can skip convention and go straight to the primary ballot if you get 28,000 signatures. So the blue, the strikeout, is the previous stuff here. And we have the 28,000 signatures. They're changing that, or proposing to change that, to only need 1,000 signatures to qualify for a statewide race. Or for the US House, 500 signatures, state auditor, state treasurer, 200 signatures, Senate district, 200, state house, 100, down to the lesser of 50 signatures or 3% of the voters in a particular county. What this will do, if this comes through, it will make the convention and caucus system basically dead. And because there will be no purpose anymore to go there, and it will put a lot of people on the primary ballot. And so one of the things with having a lot of people on the primary ballot is that you then will most likely have people winning without a majority of the vote. And so you have to look at this proposal in conjunction with this proposal in HB 231, which says we now are proposing that there be runoff elections, so the two highest candidates then go to a runoff. This would have impacted the AG's race this last year because Derek Brown did not get a majority of the vote in the primary. But other than that, I'm not personally aware of too many other elections that were decided without a majority vote. But if it becomes the norm where you can just gather signatures and get on the primary ballot, we would have a lot more a lot more runoff elections. And so there'd be the primary, then there'd be the runoff election after that, if this were to take place. And again, this is, in my opinion, a clear shot at completely gutting the convention and caucus system here in Utah. Okay.
So are you able to put an R behind your name on that primary if you do it this way? Because the
Yes.
bottom line is that the legislature doesn't get to decide how a party, a qualified political party, chooses their nominee. So this is where this is completely unconstitutional based on our Republican constitution and bylaws, from what I understand. So, the government doesn't get to decide who our nominee is going to be. Our party gets to decide, and our party chooses the caucus and convention system. So how can they do that and still put an R behind their name? It's like, if you're going to go straight to the primary, you're going to go as an independent because the party didn't choose you. Am I misunderstanding something here?
Yes. There was a lot of discussion about this with Phil Lyman's campaign. And Phil Lyman's campaign was not entirely transparent about everything that's gone on in the law. SB 54 that started this process, the signature process back in the day, back in 2014, was litigated heavily. And it was looked at by the courts. Actually, some parts of SB 54 were struck down as unconstitutional, but not all parts were. And the provision about signature gathering to be on the primary ballot, that was upheld. The Republican Party did not update its bylaws based on that, but the law that mandated that the party put up the candidates that got signatures was upheld by the courts. And so people can have a very strong interpretation of the Constitution to say this should be unconstitutional. That's actually my opinion. I believe it should have been unconstitutional. But the courts have reviewed it. It's been to the Supreme Court. And they have not decided to step in on it. And it was there previously as well. It wasn't just with Phil Lyman this last year. And so currently as it stands, the constitutional side of it, as interpreted by the courts, says the government can do this. And so the government's running with it. What they're saying for the need for it is because there was a lot of talk this last election about how 28,000 signatures just made it so only the rich would get through, and it favored the rich and wealthy. And so they, instead of pulling back this and going back to the caucus system, they said, oh, well, let's just make it so anyone can qualify for the ballot and anyone can put the R by their name. So this is a very strong threat to the Republican Party. It'll make it so there's no check and balance on the candidates that are elected other than what the people vote for. But there won't be a vetting process, I guess is what I'm talking about, where they have to go through convention. And so there is that concern for sure with that. But as it stands, the courts have all allowed this, and it looks like they'll continue to allow it based on all the litigation that occurred this last year. When you have all that litigation and it loses at every court level, again, whether you agree with it or not, it makes it so it becomes what's allowed in the land, and the government's running with it and moving forward with that. So those are,
well, unless we switch our Republican leadership and we have people in there that'll actually stand up for the party, So I don't know. You're right. There's a lot of different. So how do we stop this? How do we stop this horrible bill, Austin?
well, the only way to stop it is to get enough public support pushing back on these people for it. You can see one of the concerns with HB 231 in conjunction with HB 193 and a few others is that they took little pieces and they put them together where one person runs this bill, one person runs this bill, but they wouldn't have run them independent of each other. It means that they've been working on things and drawing out a bigger plan when you see bills so well coordinated. And so these are bills that you should definitely, if you have concerns about them, you should be talking to people about, sharing about, and getting people to let the reps know that you're not a fan of them gutting the parties.
How much time do we have? And who do we just start calling everybody on the list of all the legislators?
Yeah, you can do that. They prefer to hear from their constituents. They give them a lot more weight. The one thing to know about this is it's most likely part of it's most likely part of the legislative agenda with how well coordinated it is. And so they have a meeting where they talk to the reps before, and they go and talk about their legislative priorities and what they're supposed to pass. And those ones are hard to defeat. I'm not saying to not try. We do need to speak out on
So
it.
they really don't work for us, right? They really don't work for us. They work for themselves. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, again, you go to the used car salesman analogy. Every used car salesman's trying to sell you a car that makes you happy, but they're also trying to make money, right? And the legislature, they do a lot of things that are good, but they certainly have things that they're doing for their own interests as well. And so that's why there's supposed to be a check and balance in place. These are removing some of the checks and balances, which is always a high concern for me. And I think, again, we need to produce a lot of talk and discussion on it. The legislative session started today. They can start voting on these things anytime. You can, on the website, if you go to these bills and you're concerned about them, you can actually say track this. So just click on track this, and then you put in your email and stuff, and they'll email you every time there's an update on it. And so status right now, this bill has not been assigned to a committee, so there's still a little time. It will have a committee hearing. You'll get an email if you say track this as soon as it gets assigned to committee. Looking at ballot signature amendments, this one is also not yet assigned to committee. So these ones, we have a little bit of time before it gets assigned to committee. Technically, it could be assigned to committee today or tomorrow for later this week, but just meaning probably isn't going to be heard tomorrow. But these are ones you probably want to get a lot of people up there to the committee hearings for to say, don't vote for this. Let's see. And Jill, you had asked about legislative activities amendments. And this one's a little bit unique. Senator McKell, I think. And it is talking about creating some restrictions around what they call the Legislative Management Committee, the State Capital Preservation Board, and the legislature. And so it's talking about lobbyists. And one of the things that's cleaning up here, a lot of these laws, the old laws used to say Utah Senate or Utah House policies. So for example, a lobbyist may not engage in conduct that violates the Utah Senate policy or the Utah House policy. They created this legislative management committee probably about a decade ago. And I think they realized their laws are a little outdated in the way they're said. So this legislative management committee, you can see it here. This committee meets and sets the management for both bodies. So they used to have kind of more separate management where you could have the House rules and the Senate rules, and they combine them to make it so it's just more of one committee. These are the members of the committee that meet, but this bill is updating to say, yeah, it's not the Senate or the House making the specific rules. It's now the management committee doing that. So that's one of the changes. And then it talks about things that the legislative management committee shall do. And so it talks about overseeing branch-wide internal administrative matters. So again, this is for Senate and House. Previously, when it was just starting, they were developing this. This is SB 143. But this is, so one of the things that happens in government is there's a push to make government more efficient. And we say, make it more efficient, more efficient. They will usually respond to that by consolidating powers together. And again, this legislative management committee already exists. It's been around for a little while now, but it is a consolidation of what used to be a separate Senate and House side of things. So, you know, they kind of, a legislative procurement unit used to be a little bit bigger. Now they've made it smaller, so it's not quite as broad. And so they took out some things that are no longer a procurement unit, which probably means that they're no longer subject to certain restrictions that used to be in place. I don't know what all those are yet. This would take a little bit of research to go through and figure out exactly who would no longer be subject to some of these restrictions, but they have lessened the restrictions on some people with this proposal. Let's see. And then it talks about this is the Capital Preservation Board, I believe. And that board now gets to make rules establishing reasonable time, place, and manner regulations relating to free speech activities on Capitol Hill and imposing limitations on commercial solicitation activities. So these rules will be made, it says, in accordance with Utah Administrative Rulemaking Act, which requires public notice and opportunity to comment. But this board, which is not, I'm quite certain it's not an elected board. We'd have to look, but I think they're appointed. We'll be making rules about what you can or can't do speech-wise on Capitol Hill or at the Capitol and commercial solicitation activities. And so some of those may be subject to further constitutional issues, but I personally have, from a check and balance perspective, I'm not a fan of boards that are not appointed, or sorry, that are not elected, making rules, especially about free speech on Capitol Hill. So I don't love that part for sure. And so they do have this thing where they're putting in this expedited appeals for, you know, if you're trying to say your free speech is being violated or something. But still, it's, I don't know, they're just delegating so much of it to committees and these other things that I've never loved that side of it. So that's a lot of what this one is, kind of cleaning up some of the old language to work with the new Legislative Management Committee and then giving them the Capital Preservation Board and some of these committees the ability to make rules related to free speech.
Hey, Austin, did you say there was somewhere on here that showed the committee members or what that consolidated committee would be? I don't trust Mike McHale for one split second. He's so bad, but was it at the top that it showed who that consolidated committee would be?
Yeah, so if you go, sorry, this is actually an old link here. If you go to the committee section, so there's committees here, and you can go to, maybe they pulled their Legislative Management Committee off. Anyways, you can go to it and select the committee, and then it will show you members of these committees. This is the 2015 committee. And so I'm trying to see, that was what
you know how they pick these committees? Sorry if you already covered that.
So people get assigned based on, so every legislative rep basically gets assigned to a committee. The more liked or influential you are up there, the higher the power committees you get assigned to. And so the committee assignments change every 2 years with new elections. And again, the more that they like you, you'll get assigned to the higher, more powerful committees. And otherwise, if you're new, it's not uncommon to be assigned to the Transportation Committee, for example, because they don't consider it a super concerning. They don't consider it a committee that deals with a lot of the more influential bills, I guess you could say. But yes, committee assignments change. It's purely based on your political abilities or your reputation or how much they like you or don't like you. So there's a very strong, you scratch our back to get your back scratched type culture up there. And a lot of that is to jockey for committee assignments, because if you can get on committee assignments, you can help get bills through or get bills killed more readily.
Yeah, I don't trust that for a split second, especially with Mike McHale being the sponsor.
Yeah, and so that's one.
I'm not liking this one at all.
Yeah, and you can go through, again, that one would take a little bit more diving to see who would no longer be regulated that used to be a legislative procurement unit and who's not. But to me, the biggest response to it is to say, hey, keep lawmaking with the legislature. Don't assign us to committees or boards. Keep it to be with our elected officials and go through the full lawmaking process. If you're going to pass a law about freedom of speech on Capitol Hill, then have you should have the backbone to send that through the whole legislature, essentially.
Yeah, that's
and then
take notes. Like talking points are really helpful for me. Can you like kind of repeat what you just said? Because I'm trying to type notes, like a good response. Because I email a couple hundred people that watch legislation and send talking points and whatnot. But
yeah, and just so you know, it's recorded and it will be posted online as well. So anything you need to get back from it, you can. But to me, the talking point is that the legislature should have the backbone, the courage to go through and pass rules related to Capitol Hill itself. If they're going to restrict freedom of speech up there or make rules about it, that should go through the full process because it impacts such a fundamental constitutional right. We shouldn't delegate that to an unelected board, is the way I see that.
We shouldn't be surprised that McHale is doing something like this. This is his vein of politics, just like Governor Cox. They want to consolidate power. They say they do it in the name of efficiency. Why don't we just make Cox the king of Utah, and then that'll be the most efficient thing we can do, and then they can get right to the point of whatever it is they want. Or we can have a full legislature debate issues and do their jobs without trying to consolidate power to individuals or committees. This is ridiculous. This is typical of McHale and Cox, and we shouldn't be surprised by this.
Yeah, and there's a lot that's happening in Utah to consolidate power. It is a concern for me as I watch that.
Very concerning. It's anti-American.
That
our founding fathers fought so we wouldn't have a extremely efficient government in a king or just a small group of people who made all the decisions for us. That's why they had checks and balances, and that's why they had divided legislatures, so they could actually debate these things. The Senate and the House, they would have to come to an agreement without committees consolidating both the House and the Senate like this bill, making it easier for the elites, the people who are in power, to maintain their own power and keep others from participating in the government process. This is bad government here. Just like SB 54 and the 193, the two you just mentioned. By the way, thank you very much, Austin, for hosting this. It's very insightful. But those last two bills we just went through, they're in cahoots with each other, and SB 54. By the way, can we repeal SB 54? Can that be repealed? Because it should be. It's ridiculous. You have two sets of rules for people to get elected in this state. I mean, you have one that you have to, if this were a football game, a regular football game with the caucus and everything, you have to go the whole 100 yards to make a touchdown. With SB 54, you got some people who pay a little bit extra, and they only have to go 80 yards, and then they can make a touchdown. And it's hard to explain to the voters, to the people, if you're a delegate, why one, this was who we determined was our candidate at caucus, and now, but we have, instead of Trent Staggs, we have John Curtis instead of Phil Lyman, the best choice Utah ever could have made for governor. We still have Cox, but your neighbors think that's the way it is because they don't understand. It's because we have two sets of rules with SB 54 and with the caucus system, which is the time honored way of choosing. And by the way, if Utah loses that, this is a voice of warning for you, for someone who's been in other states too. If you lose the caucus system, you lose a lot here in Utah. It'd be crazy to give that up and to yield to SB 54. We got to get rid of that. How do we do that, Austin?
So the SB 54, it is repealable. It's not set in stone. And even this 193 is modifying SB 54 to make it simpler. Now it could go the other way, just simply repeal SB 54. Mike Lee has said he supports repealing SB 54 and has asked for it to be repealed. But a lot of the people in there know they wouldn't make it through the caucus system. And so there is this self-preservation mentality. That, though, there's an interesting thing that the Utah Supreme Court handed us in July of last year. This is what triggered the amendment rush for the legislature, where they had Amendment D that got struck down by the courts as well, because the legislature was not fully forthcoming on that. But in July, the Utah Supreme Court ruled that a ballot initiative that changes the form of government, or that alters it, cannot be repealed or messed with by the legislature, because the Utah Constitution gives the people of Utah the right to alter or reform their government as they see fit. And so if they did that through a ballot initiative, it the Supreme Court, Utah Supreme Court, held it as virtually unchangeable by the legislature. The people could still change it later. So there's a whole host of issues with that, and we won't go into all those here, but the one opportunity that comes with that is if you do a ballot initiative to repeal SB 54 and return the ability to select candidates back to the parties, if people want to run outside that, they can certainly run independent. I did that for Attorney General, ran independent. But it would go back and they can change it. So that is an option. It may be the only option, unless you can get a lot of candidates in who fully support repealing SB 54. But again, if we go to this route where you now only need 1,000 signatures on a statewide race, or 500 or 200, candidates won't want to face the convention thing, and there'll be a very strong incentive against it unless it's a ballot measure. So if these bills go through,
we can't count on the candidates. We can't count on the legislature. So the only way to do this would be through a ballot initiative.
correct,
Through a referendum.
It'd be a ballot initiative at this point. The referendum's too late because the law's been in effect too long. And so you'd have the ballot initiative side of it. And again, with the Supreme Court's decision in July and them striking down Amendment D, it bought us 2 years to try and do something, which is an interesting thing.
Was at a meeting last week, and this was brought up with about 6 different legislators, and they said there's no political will to repeal SB 54 in either the House or the Senate. Well, they said the House has approved it, but the Senate will not.
Yeah,
So
the Senate will not, and the governor will not.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a ballot initiative really is the only option at this point, right?
Yeah, because again, it's been litigated extensively in the courts. Phil Lyman tried again to litigate it, and it's just, the courts aren't going to change it or address it. But again, the Utah Supreme Court said, well, because before, one reason people never went to repeal it before is because the legislature could just repeal the ballot initiative immediately. And so people said, well, what's the point? But the Utah Supreme Court, with their decision, did change that balance of power some, which again, there's a whole host of concerns with. I'm not pretending like we're in this perfect spot. There's a lot we need to do to shore up some things there on checks and balances, but that is something. Now, Eric on the call had asked a question about the effect of Trump's executive orders, if it's going to change anything happening in the legislature this time or not. I thought it was a really good question. I want to make sure we address that. And Laura had also asked some questions about the bills, but I don't see her on the call. So Laura, if you're on the call, let me know. But I want to make sure we get to those that are on the call first. So Eric had asked, so Trump yesterday signed 100, 200 something executive orders. I have not seen all of them yet. And the question is, what impact does this have on the state of Utah, on the legislature, on this legislative session? The short answer is it will likely not change a whole lot of things for the legislature. It may embolden the legislature to do a few certain things. So some of the executive orders on immigration, we're going to see a lot of immigration-related bills in Utah, and it may make them more confident in voting for some of those because of those executive orders. But there's other ones, and I'll show you this bill over here, HB 158, State Sovereignty Amendments. This is from Representative Shepherd. This bill declares that an international organization does not have any power, jurisdiction, or legal authority in the state. And this honestly may be a bill you guys like. So I always like to try and throw out something because there's a lot of good, bad news, obviously, but there are some good things too. And it provides that the executive of the state, so our governor, may not declare a state of emergency in response to the international organization's declaration. Now, the reason I say this, bring this one up, is to point out something that happened with Trump's executive orders. So if we go down to, let's see, they define international organization. And they specifically mean international organization to only mean three things: the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, or the World Health Organization. So I wouldn't mind if this definition were a little bit broader, but still, it's a very good start.
Which bill is this again?
This is HB 158. And so in this one, Trump just signaled that the U.S. is going to withdraw from the World Health Organization. The U.S., I think, funds 18% of the World Health Organization. The next largest funder is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then Germany is the next largest funder at 3% of their budget. And so one of Trump's thing is he says, we're tired of America paying way more than their fair share. If you want us to be a part of things, have everyone pay their fair share for stuff. So he signaled to pull out. That will take a year under the laws and rules that exist. The U.S. will be in it for 1 more year. So after that, then the question is, will this law here in Utah have any meaning? Will have impact if we're not part of the World Health Organization? And the answer is yes, because to the point of this bill, our state can still choose to respond, choose to follow what the World Health Organization or the UN says. And so this is putting on some restrictions to say, if the World Health Organization comes out and says, you need to do something, the governor can't base a state of emergency on what the World Health Organization said or what the UN said. Because without it, even if America wasn't part of the World Health Organization, any governor, any state can still choose to follow those things. And we have this happening in Utah. For any that listened to what Phil Lyman talked about with a lot of the legislation that came through, he tied a lot of the legislation that was introduced back to the United Nations and some of their agendas. And we've seen some of those bills come through that the UN's pushed, people run them, Utah votes for them. And even if the U.S. pulls out of the United Nations or the World Health Organization, any of these things, states can still pass laws based on their models or policies. So the short answer is Trump's executive orders won't have an impact on most of the legislation Utah's considering. And they can still consider it if they choose to. And so we still have to be vigilant about saying, even if Trump has said the U.S. won't participate at the U.S. level, states can still choose to participate at the state level. And so a bill like this one, the state sovereignty amendments, is a helpful step towards saying, hey, Utah, don't follow lockstep with these international groups.
So how does this affect the Olympics? I mean, this means that caucus can't just declare that we have to follow the Paris Accord or anything like that, especially since Trump just helped us get out of that. I mean, we can now, I mean, we can hold Cox accountable. You don't have to go with these international mandates because we're not subject to them. So now it's up to so that's a good thing, because that would mean it was left to our legislature to debate
Correct.
those things.
Yep.
Yeah, including the Olympics, right?
The Olympics aren't included here. So again, that's why I said this wasn't as broad as I would like it to be. If you go to the definition of
Right.
international organization, it did not include the Olympic body. It means the UN, World Economic Forum, or World Health Organization. So if the Olympics still said you had to do something, they could still do it here.
I see.
Unless we put in Olympics there. But if you put in Olympics, the legislature probably won't vote for this because they want the Olympics here.
Yeah. And half of them just want to blame Cox anyway. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So that one, but again, to me, I like the direction of this bill. I like a lot of what it's about. Now it's still, we have to understand that some of this, to the point of the used car salesman, is some of it sounds nice because Cox couldn't say, oh, we have a state of emergency because the WHO declared a state of emergency. He would just have to say, we have a state of emergency because I declared a state of emergency. So some of this bill is not, it doesn't change the outcome necessarily of a lot of things. It just means they have to say things differently. And so, yeah, so it's still this thing where I look at it and go, okay, is it going to stop a declaration of another COVID or whatever situation? Not necessarily. It just means they have to have their own findings on it as opposed to following the WHO's findings on it.
Right. Good.
So this isn't, it doesn't really have any teeth. I mean, it's not really going to change much.
It doesn't have a lot of teeth other than you may be able to sue if the governor issued a state of emergency and said because WHO did, or the World Health Organization did, that may be able to be overturned by a court. But if he just said, I'm just issuing this because I feel it's what Utah needs, we wouldn't have any teeth at that point too.
It also gets the state out of following anything Trump or the Trump administration tries to do as well then.
No, because it only applies to the UN, World Economic Forum, and
World
Health Organization.
I think this is actually a good law, and I think it does have teeth. It means that it's left up to the state to debate and do their own findings rather than be subject to the whims of those three world organizations. We're no longer subject to them. I like that.
And again, it's a good step, but the point is if the governor still chose to follow them,
right?
There's not a lot of
so
teeth.
He would have to take responsibility. He's not good at that. He likes to defer blame elsewhere and say like, oh, we just have to do this. Now he can't do that.
That would be the general teeth here. Is you'd be looking to him and his confidence or comfort in owning that himself.
Right.
Yeah. So that's one. Another one I wanted to point out with Trump's policies, and there's a lot of people that probably won't love me saying this, or his executive orders. It's important to know that not all of his executive orders will be constitutional. He is issuing executive orders that I'm very certain will be struck down by courts. There's a political game that's a part of it. And it's important to understand that. And as an example, he has an executive order to end birthright citizenship. That one, I've looked at the case law and looked at news articles and things, news sources talking to attorneys, and the news can't really find a reputable constitutional attorney that believes very strongly that will prevail in court. The courts will most likely strike that one down. They already have backups to it. They're planning. But the text of the 14th Amendment is pretty plain, pretty clear. And they've made some attempts, Michael included, to kind of make some claims about why it should be different, but they're very from a legal perspective, very far out there claims. And virtually all attorneys are kind of like, yeah, unless there's something amazing that happens at the Supreme Court to go against plain language, then we'll have birthright citizenship still. And so again, the reason I say that is because Trump's executive orders get challenged extensively. They are not all constitutional for sure. And so these executive orders, as you see them come down, know that, for example, the birthright citizenship one has already been sued over in court. So it was signed and they already have a lawsuit or 2 or 3 over it. And I would expect that to change pretty quickly in the courts. So these are some of the things that, from a political perspective, they will certainly inform the way the state's headed. Utah is, due to, I'd say, public pressure, Utah is putting a lot more emphasis on illegal immigration. There was one bill, I don't have the number immediately. Actually, it might be here. Sorry, let's see if it was this one. Okay, here it is. Yeah, so this is one that someone had asked about. This is a bill targeting immigration, or illegal immigration, I should say. So SB 90, Unlawful Presence Criminal Enhancement Amendments. And what this bill does is it makes it 1 degree worse for any law you break if you are an illegal immigrant. So if you're unlawfully in the United States when you commit the crime, if it was a Class C, it goes to a Class B. If it was a Class B, it goes to a Class A. If it was a Class A misdemeanor, it goes to a 3rd degree felony, 3rd degree to 2nd degree, 2nd degree to 1st degree type thing. And then there's a minimum fine as well that gets imposed, where courts used to be able to say no fine or whatnot, and they're imposing minimum fines with this. So this is one, again, from Trump's executive orders, from the things he's talking about. The Utah legislature goes and it kind of runs with that. And so the executive orders certainly feed into what is happening, but they do not fully control it. And that's still up to the legislature to decide these things. So that's one that you can be aware of, SB 90. Then we had questions on SB 50. Limited purpose local government entities board of trustees compensation amendments. It's a long title. This one, again, we're talking about removing checks and balances. It used to be that the board of trustees for service on the board, and I'll show you in a second what they're talking about here, talking about these special districts. They used to be limited in pay. They couldn't get more than $5,000 per year. That may have grown a little bit old. Maybe they need to be paid a little bit more than that for their time, which I don't have concern with fair pay necessarily. But instead of just increasing it with inflation or something like that, they said that they can increase it to whatever they want. And all they have to do is hold a public hearing on their proposed increase. I don't know. I like a few more checks and balances than a public hearing. The public hearings are just kind of, you just go and you get a raise after you sit and listen to people yell at you. They don't change these decisions.
Yeah.
And so I don't love that as a check and balance. These special districts, so this SB 50 is modifying some of this Board of Trustees provision here. And it's talking about, let's see, I might be in the wrong one, sorry. It's talking about these special districts. And these special districts, so these are the types of things that can now set their own rates for the Board of Trustees: airports, cemeteries, fire protection, garbage, healthcare, library, mosquito abatement districts, parks, sewage operations, any of these types of construction items, I guess, transportation. flood, water, law enforcement service, animal control. There's quite a few special districts that can exist and have a board of trustees. I don't know if every one of them has a board of trustees. I didn't get that far into it. But again, we're removing a cap with that one. And then the last bill, try and get this in before the hour's up. This one is an election code amendment that, again, I don't think we can understand the full scope of it until you view it in line with all election code amendments. There's quite a few. But there's a number of things this one does. And this one, again, was pretty thorough in the highlighted provisions about talking about most of the things. And it's clarifying. So there was some language that was ambiguous before. They clarified you can remove your signature from a petition. Another thing it did is if you sign a petition for a candidate, so one of these SB 54 routes, they now have made it possible to remove your name from that. But you only have like 2 or 3 days or something. It's pretty quick after. So not a lot of time. It's not the same as other petitions still. But before you couldn't remove your name. And they added that in. They did add in that this information, this might be a concern to a number of people who want a little more election integrity. They have to immediately transmit vote total information to the lieutenant governor. So they can't really look at it, verify it, inspect it. It's supposed to just get sent up the chain very quickly. And then it also repeals the in-state residency requirement for signature gatherers doing certain things. So there was a requirement that you had to have someone from Utah gathering signatures for certain petitions, including those for a candidate. And they're making it easier to say, oh, you can just hire any company from anywhere. They bring in people from out of state, and they can come gather signatures for you. So this certainly opens it up to more national pressure, which is already there through money, but meaning groups can just come in from out of state, gather signatures, do
What's
their
that
thing.
one again, Austin? What's the number of that one?
SB 53. So, and they may say there may be some constitutional issues when I talk about constitutional, court interpreted constitutional issues with limiting it to in-state residency requirements, which may be one reason they're addressing this. They have been sued over a number of these things. But this is still, in the end, opening this up. It's making new cities, again, there's a lot of hodgepodge stuff in here. It's making new cities determine their new government in half the time. They used to have 60 days when a city was incorporated to now only 30 days, at least certain features of it. So I don't know what the rush is, why we need to go from 60 to 30 days, but it feels like it gives the people in the city less time to figure things out and gives those pushing things the ability to get it through faster. So I like, the one thing I like is that you can remove your name from a petition for a candidate. Again, I don't love candidate petitions, but I do think you should be able to remove your name from it. I would like more time on that, not their 2 or 3 days they put in here. But the rest of it, I'm not a huge fan of this one. So those are some overview of
Thank
some
you,
of the
Austin.
things.
Thank
If you
you.
have bills, send them to me for next week. We'll go through them first. It'll just kind of be first in, first out type thing.
Austin,
So
I
send
have a
them along.
question. I was trying to look online. Isn't there somewhere we can find a calendar of the bills that they'll be? I mean, it seems like that's what we should cover first, are the bills that are coming up. Do you know if there's anywhere to find? I mean, I was able to find a list of bills being passed, but I couldn't find a calendar of when they're being, you know.
Yeah, so
I know that's kind of, I guess, what I thought we would do is maybe, or anyway, thought would be a good thing to do is to look at the upcoming bills first.
Yeah, so to be honest, there's more bills than we have time to go through, even that are upcoming. And some of the ones that have high concerns, we need a little time to let people talk to people about, try and get them ready, even if it's 2-3 weeks out type thing. And so my preference was to go by concern and level of, where if you have something you're concerned about individually, to give you time to talk to people about it and talk to reps about it. If we just stick to it, you can quickly run out of time, or if you just follow the calendar. But the calendaring, one of the games they play is that they won't calendar things until a little bit before, because they don't want you to have a ton of time to go and assemble people together for it. So many of these bills will just sit there. It'll just say, if you go to status, it'll just sit there, and suddenly it'll be in committee in 2 days. So there's not a super clean way to track it until it's out of committee. Once it's out of committee, they will put it on the House reading calendar, and you can kind of follow it generally from the House reading calendar, but even then they circle bills, they do all kinds of games there too and mess with that. And so it's still pretty hard to follow chronologically through the session. And my opinion is that's intentional. They will say, well, it's just because it's the way it works here. But that is a little difficult to do. But you can certainly, if you have a committee you are highly concerned about, you can check it and see what's on their calendar coming up, and we can talk about those bills. But again, a lot of this is, if you're on the call and you're taking time, let me know what bills you care about, and I will try and get to them. And if not, you can call me offline and we can talk about them too. Because there's no way to get through everything. As an attorney, I don't have time, honestly, to get through every single bill. And this is just an attempt to say, can we identify some of the bigger issues, and understanding that other groups and other people have to look at things as well. But we're going to try and hit some of the bigger items that you care about. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you
really what I'm
so
taking from
much.
this. Yeah, and I wanted to tell you, Austin, how much I appreciate it. I voted for you. I know that all the people in our group did. And we appreciate this very, very much. But what basically what I'm getting the impression here is it's up to us. I mean, it's up to us. Our legislature, they think that they are unstoppable. They think they can push through whatever they want. They completely disregard us. And so having a group like this is absolutely imperative. And we need to all hell needs to rain down on them on this SB, whatever it was, 193. And also the 231. But we have got to get, and we can do it. You guys, we've done it. We can get thousands of people. We can get people down there. We are going to fight this. If they are not going to take away our party, they're not going to make it to where we lose our caucus and convention system. And, it's up to us. So thank you again for doing that. And everybody, you need to tell everybody let's get together. Let's let everybody know when these bills are coming up for committee. We have to all be there. We have to make calls, bring everybody who is a Republican that values our process, because we just got we feel like our country is turned, opening a page, having Trump in there and stopping some of this bull crap. Now we got to save our state, because we are down that same path. So we need to do something. So thank you again for your time, and keep us posted. If anybody hears about a really bad bill, we need to know about it, because like you said, there's so many, and we don't want stuff to slip through the cracks. We've got some bad legislators in there who think they have all the power in the world. We need to stop it.
And one of the things I would recommend is signing up for a number of groups. There are quite a few that watch things, that go through things. There's just so much that's happening. No one person, no one group catches it all. So get information from a number of places. Again, the value of this particularly is if there's legal things or stuff you want to pass by an attorney to get an opinion on, because sometimes I have seen in groups, they will misunderstand some language sometimes in bills and get the wrong opinion about it, whether Could be that they feel it's good or they feel it's bad when it's the opposite. And so it can be helpful to go through that. I'm happy to go through the legal language with you on any of those questions. But yeah, but let's just keep people informed. I'm a big believer. If we keep people informed, we talk through things, we can do a lot. And you know, they passed sales tax on services over us. They didn't care what we felt about that. And Utah spanked them on that one pretty good. And I think to your point, Kay, there can be some good checks and balances back if we're active. Might take some work, might take some sacrifice, but we can do that. So thanks to those who jumped on today. Feel free to let people know about it. And again, reach out to me, shoot me questions on bills, and then we'll try and address those. And then these will be posted online as well at youtube.com/@the @ I believe first. And there's a playlist for the legislative session there.
Can
Thanks
you
for
give that
joining.
again, Austin? I couldn't hear what you said after the slash.
Yeah, youtube.com/@. So at,
Oh,
then I believe first. And
I believe first.
yeah, I put that in the chat there. You can copy it from the chat if you want.
Oh, thank you.
But there's a playlist there of, I had the first 2 trainings we did on the legislative session, and then I'll post these there each week as well.
Yeah, appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much.
Do you know, so you mentioned groups
Hey, Austin, on your
that help give information about certain legislation. I know about Utah Citizens for the Constitution, and I think Kristen Chevier, who's a House District Lead, has Your Help Freedom, and I believe Eagle Forum. Do you know of any others?
Yeah, there's one called Utah Legislative Watch, and that puts out quite a bit of good information. And then,
How do you find that one?
how do you find them?
I mean, do they have like a Facebook group or a web page or?
Let me see if I can find them here quick. Utah.
Hey, quickly, Austin, on your page that I just saw you, it didn't say I believe first. It just said @ believe first. So is it I believe first or believe first?
So it is at, so the YouTube channel, if you're talking about the YouTube channel, it's the @ I believe first. And so the what I put in the chat there has the I believe first.
It does? Okay, I didn't see it, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. The I is a little small, but it says @ I believe first. Utah Legislative Watch is with, let's see, Marianne Christensen. It's a good question about where they are. I will have to try and find out, because if you look it up, you get a lot of the legislature stuff. So I'll have to try and find that and have that for you next week, but you can try and find it too. Look on Facebook or others. But yeah, but Utah Legislative Watch does a great job. And then, you know, groups like, even if you disagree with a group, it may be helpful to get information from them. So if you do, you know, the ACLU, what it does is it lets you know about things they're concerned about and fighting against, to let you know what you might want to support if it's a group you don't agree with. Or if they're coming out and saying, oh, here's something we love, you should go support it, then maybe you want to know about it so that you can identify, oh, wow, this is an issue. So, you know, I'd say don't feel bad getting information from other sources and people, because you start to see kind of a bigger picture with it too. And one other group that does provide some good level of insight, like they've got voting records and things, Libertas Institute also has some good legislative side of things. They don't track everything, but they can be decent. And then there's other smaller groups. There's a group called Big Ocean Women, you know, a number of them, and each group operates at different levels each legislative session, but they are ones that can put things out depending on where they're at that session. So you can ask around, but ask around in the chats and things who people get information from as well. And you'll be able to, I think if you're trying to follow everything, you can get quite a bit of it. My recommendation is to pick a couple topics you really want to focus on and put all your time and energy into those, because if you try and address every bad bill up there, you'll go crazy and burn yourself out. And you can trust, one of the things you can trust, and I've seen this many times, is somebody will care about it and someone will work on it and do the things that are most passionate to you and put your time and energy there, because probably God's prompting you and he'll prompt other people, and it's a joint effort for sure. But yeah, but this is good stuff. Try and be involved with, watch the session. And again, if there's anything crazy, reach out to me during the week. I try and be open. So, and then Jill just put in Marianne's email, at least, utahlegislativewatch.marianne with a Y and no E @gmail.com. So utahlegislativewatch.maryann @gmail.com. And you can sign up for her list.
Thanks, Austin, so much. Appreciate you guys.
Okay, have a great week.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.